Okay, folks, we're going to begin. We're going to begin with listening to a couple songs that were really favorites of John and Rose. So now hear these. Between these songs, I'm going to tell you a little story about John. while she gets the other one set up. John was a very positive, uplifting presence among us. They joined about 10 years ago. This is the only time he ever said no. About the time that they joined, we were into having people reaffirm their vows in front of the congregation. At the end of the service, a couple would come in, and it would be like a wedding ceremony, but it was a reaffirmation. We had two couples who had been married 70 years, and they both wanted to do this, so we had separate times for each of them. Now, as Lori and I got to know Rose and John, I discovered that we were married in the same week in 1985. So I said to John and Rose, why don't we do this together in the other room? We didn't have this room then. Why don't the four of us stand up there after a service and reaffirm our vows? Doesn't that sound like a great thing? We probably won't make it to 70 years together. So John said, no. And the women said, thank you, John. I guess John knew, I've got you, babe. This is the end of their TV series, so they do a little bit here, and then they get into it, the song. Can't hear them. If you can't make them sing, you're going to sing it with me. This part you don't have to hear. Well, it sounds like our audio has bummed out here. Sorry, Rose, we owe you that one. Does anybody want to sing it? No, not you, Jackie, not me either. Okay, we're going to move on. Welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist Congregation. Oh, we're bringing in Sonny and Cher? Oh, yeah, just hold it up to the mic. Thank you. And that reminds me, please silence your cell phones.
Oh, I hope I'm not in trouble.
Anyway, welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We now light the chalice. We light all our services with the light. Come on up, JD, and do this. We get light from many different religious sources. We get light from nature. We get light from within. We get light from people that come our way. And we got a light from the guy we're honoring and remembering today, John Crickenberger. The first hymn is 29, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, the Beethoven tune. If you're able and willing, let's stand and sing 29, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. Be seated. And now these readings from the Roman Catholic tradition, CC and Psalm 23 from Hebrew Scripture. Our translations are on the opposite page, so feel free to read along with me. Where hate rules, let us bring love. Where sorrow, joy. Let us strive more to comfort than to be comforted, to understand others than to be understood, to love others more than to be loved. For it is in giving that we receive, and in pardoning that we are pardoned. And this translation of the 23rd Psalm is from a Hebrew congregation in Massachusetts. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. You cradle me in green pastures. You lead me beside the still waters. You restore my soul. You guide me in the paths of righteousness, for you are righteous. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You soothe my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in your house forever. And in the middle of our service, we sing what is kind of for us our theme song. It's number 123 in the hymnal. Please remain seated. We hum it once, then we sing it. 123, Spirit of Life. And now we'll have some family remembrances, beginning with Rose's tribute read by Monica, and then Glenn for Glenn and Andrew. Okay.
This is the remembrance from my mother, Rose Crickenberger. Yes, John, I'll remember you, my dependable, honest man. When granddaughter Izzy was very little and in a crowd of relatives, she lifted up her hands to you. You, the 6'5" grandfather, happily picked her up so she could finally look down on everyone. And the time you showed your fine art appreciation by being so very relieved to stay home with grandson Ethan while the rest of us went to an art museum. P.S. You loved my oil paintings, but only if there were sailboats in them. All of us loved fishing, boating and sailing with you, our captain and my barefoot Floridian who grew up in West Palm Beach, the one with the smirky grin. And my engineer, with your brilliant mind, you were known in your field of expertise, finite element analysis. I never did understand your field of expertise. You were once president of the board of this church until a stroke started limiting your abilities. After years at home, you began having multiple health issues and deepening memory problems. You were moved to Inspiritus of Stewart Assisted Living with Memory Care. You still maintained your very own sense of humor. I was there when you were depressed, and a male staff nurse tried to cheer you up by saying, John, you have such a wonderful, beautiful wife here by your side, while I am single and all alone. Your quick response was, would you like to buy her? The three of us burst out laughing. Lastly, John, I'll remember my favorite memories of us together. I hadn't fished since I was a young girl, but after you decided to sell our sailboat, next came the Pathfinder fishing boat. You frequently fished with others, but soon you were also teaching me. That took patience. A frequent ritual began of getting up in the dark and hitching the boat's trailer to the truck. First stop was the bagel shop where I'd buy us breakfast while you bought the shrimp from the bait shop next door. Motoring out from a marina, if it was a clear morning, we'd watch the spectacular sunrise over Hutchinson Island. Calm waters meant we might take our small boat out of the lagoon and into the ocean. If we were lucky, one of us or both would catch a fish or two for dinner. We loved it. While you were at Inspiritus, I'd often read to you. Towards the end, and your memory failing, I was surprised to hear you ask if I was going to read the book that you called The Old Man in the Water again. So I started reading it a second time. It was Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. A hospice chaplain once asked me what kept us together. Without even thinking, I blurted out, "Why, love, of course." And we've been married 37 years.
Glenn, do you want to come up here or down there, whichever you want? Okay. I like to hold on.
Just in case. It's great to see everybody. I know most of you. If you don't know me and you talk to my father about his kids, I'm the one that he would say he never thought would make it past 18. And that I didn't have a disease or anything like that. He was certain that that was going to happen. But here I am. When I remember my father, for those who don't know, most of my life, till Rose came along, he was my father and my mother. So I depended on him for everything. But funny with the memory thing, and one of our last visits, well, it wasn't the last visit, but not too long ago, we were talking, and sometimes he did this, and I think he was thinking he was talking to Andy, because he started telling a story about his brother, and how when he was in elementary school, apparently, and he was talking about me, apparently I was upset because Mother's Day fell during the school year, but Father's Day didn't. And they should have something where, you know, my father would be at the school. So I have no memory of that, but it's funny that he remembered it, and I can't imagine. I would have loved to be there with him and probably the other 30 mothers there on Mother's Day. I would have loved to seen it, but I can imagine it was maybe a bit uncomfortable for him anyway. But he was always up for just about anything, and I got a job washing dishes and $3.35 an hour. But I wanted a sailboat when I was 14. You know, there was all kind. I'd look in the paper, and there was this $10 one here, and we'd go and see it, and it was either, if it was made of wood, it was all rotted, or if it was made of metal, it was all rusted. And I said, "Oh, we can fix this, and we can fix that." And I almost got them there, but instead, 14 years old, I wanted to buy a Hobie Cat sailboat when I saw one, and let's say $2,500 it was, and this would have been, I don't know, 1984 maybe? Probably 1984. But anyway, my dad was up for it, says, "Well, as long as you go to work, you know, and you pay for it, then we'll go ahead and get it." And of course, it wasn't as easy as all that, because I didn't have a driver's license. So to go to work for it, he had to get up and drive me to work. And then when I got out at 11 or 12 at night, he had to come and pick me up. And, you know, of course, his bedtime was 9 o'clock or so he didn't always enjoy that. But there was always adventures. A little later, I conned him into, I had this old pickup truck that had fallen apart in Easton. And I was living in Northampton. I don't know the distance between them, but there's a lot of hills between here and there. And it needed a new engine. And I conned him into, well, let's take your truck and get a dolly, and we'll tow the truck back to my house. And so he was up for that, but that day I was able to find at a junkyard a new motor for it. So I said, "Dad, why don't we just stop and get the motor? We'll put it in the back of the truck. Then we'll hook the truck up and we'll drive it to Nazareth, or Northampton. It really didn't go well at that point, but really where it got worse is when the sky opened up and it started sleeting. And it was one of those where, it's rain on the windshield, but by the time it gets to your side window, it freezes up. And we lived, like most people in Pennsylvania, on this mountain, and you had to make this turn back into an alley on the thing, and it was covered with ice, and we were at the bottom of the hill, and I didn't think we were gonna make it, but no, he put that thing in four-wheel drive, and somehow we made it to the top of that hill, and in there, and usually my ventures were, Dad, it's only going to take a half an hour or something like that. 6 hours later, we would make it back to the house. But sometimes we didn't get along so good. Sometimes he just didn't understand things about me, and I look back and I don't understand. I remember the one time I borrowed his Datsun 310 GX, and it had one of these sunroofs that popped up on it. And of course, me and my friends, we decided it would be best if we just pull the sunroof all the way out so we can stand up and drive down the road and be idiots and all that. All that went well. I put the sunroof back in after I dropped my friends off, and I'm driving down the road, minding my own business. All of a sudden, I look up and the sunroof is not there. I turn around, I'm like, oh, I can probably, I can fix this. I turn around, busted into a billion pieces on the side of the road. So in my 16-year-old mind, I decided, and I think he got over the sunroof thing, but what he did not understand is I pulled it into the garage and I said, well, maybe you won't notice. I just won't say anything. Until, of course, he got up and I don't really remember how that one ended. But after, borrowing the car was one thing, but, I bought, and of course this was another adventure. I dragged him up into some mountain somewhere, and I bought a Chevelle, ugliest looking car you ever seen in your life, $100. But he stood there while I changed the oil in the middle of the field there where we found it, and then of course the battery wouldn't work, and then we tried to jump it, but we couldn't get to jump it, so we had to go get a battery. I had no money, and of course Dad would buy me a battery, and of course he would buy me a battery. So anyway, I kind of loved this stupid old car, but I had done something, and he said, no, you're grounded, no car for you. I'm like, this is my car, though. I bought the car with my own $100. You can't do that, but he thought he got me, so he took the license plate off, so I can't drive. Well, I knew how to fix that because I had a screwdriver, so I just took his license plate and put it on my car. So I don't remember how many days it was until I believe it was a police officer reminded him that he did not have a license plate on the back of his car. So, yeah, and I blacked out I don't know what happened after that, but yeah, no, I stole it and left it right there, right there in the garage. I figured he'd never notice these things, but he's always found out about them in the end. So I felt really bad until there was some sort of an explanation when my grandmother started telling me stories about my father and things that he would used to do. And one of the classics, and this was actually in the newspaper, so I know this happened, but my grandmother told me about the time my father, who bought a kit. I don't know where you got a kit for a boat back in those days, plywood, screwed it together, and you rented an engine back in those days, he told me, because the engines were so expensive. But he went out fishing for sharks, but the problem is there was a tropical storm warning. and his parents told him he couldn't go out. I think the people that probably rented him the motor probably told him he shouldn't go out. But yeah, according to the newspaper, it took the Coast Guard to go get him because he wasn't coming in there. So I imagine Rosie was catching fish that day. If I knew my dad, you're not going to stop because of a little tropical storm. That's not going to do it. I have a Corvette, and one of my favorite stories that I learned later, my father had a friend named Snooky. My Uncle Bill, where you are, you remember Snooky? But the story that I heard was Snooky and my father were driving down US 1 in West Palm Beach and got pulled over. And it was pretty obvious why they got pulled over, because it was the two of them and apparently 3 girls in his Corvette. And the cops, this is the way the story was told to me, that the cop that pulled him over knew he was doing something wrong but didn't know exactly what he was doing. And apparently he called a supervisor or something like that. And back in those days, they said, fine him $1 and take those girls home. So, as I learned, my father may have been just as much of a handful as I was, and that made me feel a little better. But I can tell you that I believe the best parts of me come from my father, and I'm going to miss him.
Now, I'm not sure what the order is. Is it Monica and JD doing some storytelling up here, or somebody else? You want to be right there? You want to come up here?
I'll do it here, that's fine. I just have a couple things, both from my kids who are John's grandkids. So the first one was, now Genevieve and Sebastian, who are my kids, they're a little bit younger, so they don't have quite as many memories of Grandpa John. But for Genevieve, she remembers baking chocolate chip cookies with me for Grandpa John's birthday. He seemed so happy when we FaceTimed him, so we used to, because we live in Pennsylvania, we would FaceTime a lot. He was so happy when we FaceTimed him and he opened the package with the cookies since they were his favorite. And I also remember that because I remember trying to package them and send them as quickly as possible to Florida so they could get there fresh and hopefully not too gooey from the heat. Sebastian, he remembers that Grandpa John really liked one of his favorite college football teams, which is the University of Florida, since Grandpa John went to school there. And even today, Sebastian is wearing his Florida Gator shirt to honor Grandpa John. So for myself, I won't be quite as long as Glenn's wonderful talk, but so even though John was my stepfather, for those of you maybe who don't know, I've more or less known him for most of my life. I don't know how old I was. I know I was about 8 when they got married, but probably 5 or 6 maybe when I first met him, so quite a few years. And the one thing I'll definitely remember most about is his humor. I'm sure that anyone who knows him, knows he was always just quick with funny comebacks. A lot of them about my mom, which made it even funnier, or to my mom. And then, I would say even until the end, he was still making his humorous jabs. So I think the last time I saw John was in January, yeah. And even then, he was still making jokes. We also have the same, some of our memories of fishing and boating outings. And I'm sure John, though, would still make fun of me because after all these years, I still can't tell the difference between the port and starboard side of the boat. The most important thing, I'll remember those, how well he took care of my mom, and I will always be thankful and grateful for that. So thank you, John, for the wonderful memories. We will miss you, and we love you.
Okay. Now, I've got these stories from Izzy and Jackie. Are these for me to read?
Yes, I actually haven't even seen them. They said they were sent right to Chris.
Yes.
Forwarded to you, so.
Well, I got this from Izzy. Favorite memory for Grandpa. Every time we visited Jackie, and I would play Trouble with Grandpa. Is that a game, Trouble? Oh. When it was his turn and he got to move his piece, he always said, "I'm on the move." And he would always stick out his tongue when it was his turn because it was his thinking face. I don't think Grandpa ever truly understood the rules or how the game worked out, but he was always willing to play. And this from Jackie, my favorite memory, was always wanting to play different board games. At one time, playing Trouble with him for 2+ hours. He was always willing to play games with my sister and me. His competitive spirit and humor will be missed. Are there other family memories that people wanted to share? Or did you have something, JD, that you wanted to? Yeah, come on up.
Hello, everyone. My name's JD, and I'm John's stepson. And Reverend Bob asked for our favorite memories of John. One of my all-time favorites is when we went. Everything comes back to fishing, it seems, here about John. We went out fishing in the lagoon, and my younger daughter, Izzy, was 6 years old at the time. My older daughter, Jackie, was 8. And John, I swear, who has the patience of the saint, and always claimed that there's no way he'd ever be able to raise two daughters. He would be just fine with daughters. And he wanted to make sure that, this was the first time, they had been on the water before, but they were like newborn and 2 years old. So this is the first time they were really gonna go fishing. And they were both so excited. And the amount of time John put in to make sure that my kids had a great time. I mean, anyone who has ever owned a sailboat knows how much prep work it is, especially when you're dealing with salt water, to prep the boat, to get the bait, to launching it in the water. And this was definitely in the summer, because the kids were in school, so you know how hot it is in Florida summer on the water. We went out, and John was determined that both girls would catch a fish. And the very first one to catch a fish was my 6-year-old daughter, which was fantastic in a way, because usually my older daughter beats my younger daughter at everything. And it was funny because John was torn between laughing that Izzy got the first fish and concerned about my older one, because my older one was so mad that Izzy got the fish first. And if you know my younger daughter, Izzy, she is quite the talker, like non-stop talker. Once she caught her fish that was probably about this big, she instantly became an expert fisherman, giving advice to my older daughter about how fishing is done, the right way to catch a fish. And this whole time, I don't even think John was able to cast anything in the water between the girls crossing lines and, everything else that could go wrong fishing. I think it was at least an hour later where Jackie finally caught a fish, and we returned back. And I remember it was my mom, my 2 girls, myself, and my wife, Teri. None of us fisherwomen in the least. And we got back, and I was the only one that didn't catch a fish. And at John and Mom's house, there was a wall of fame where you got your picture posted holding the fish that you caught. there was one noticeable void on that wall of fame, and that was me. Every time we went out, I could not get a fish, and like I said, I'm not even gonna pretend to be a fisherman, but I would hope just dumb luck I would have got one at some point. And John used to relentlessly bust on me and be like, you know, there's one open slot there. There's one open slot there. Finally, I think it was, I don't know, 10 years ago, it was just before his stroke. We were out fishing, you know, one last time. I don't know if it was fate or what, but I mean, I caught a fish this big. All right, it was more like this big. All right, it was more like just big enough to be able to swallow whatever bait was on the hook. So I have to say, I think John was proud of me. I finally put that last frame on the wall of fame of me with my fish that was maybe that big. But it was done. But I mean, that's just the kind of person that John was. I mean, to take a 6-year-old and 8-year-old girl out fishing, where you knew they weren't going to last long, and he probably spent more time prepping the boat and us cleaning the boat than we were actually on the water. But he always said he could never raise girls, particularly teenage girls, but my goodness, when you see him interact with my girls, you know they would have had him wrapped around their finger, or he would have been able to settle in just fine dealing with the girls. And my girls both just absolutely adored him, and like someone, I think when you shared, I mean, Izzy just absolutely loves him, you know, 6'5", gentle giant, and will be well missed. So that was my favorite memory, and I'm glad I got on the wall before you know he didn't remember that we were on the wall. But we're all on the wall. It's good.
Perseverance. Any other family members with a memory they want to share? I want to bring it to a close then with my favorite memory of John, and the memory I wish he didn't keep, but he kept it to the end. In a small church, it's hard to get people to do jobs. John and Rose joined here in September of 2012. I looked that up. I've got your signatures with the date. September of 2012. We elect a new board the following March to start April 1. So they joined in September, new Unitarians here. And by the next March, I had to ask John to be a board member. We didn't have people to serve on the board. So John, yes, was willing to do that. It turned out nobody was willing to be the vice president of the board. I guess the president was Gail, but nobody would be vice president. I guess they thought, you know, if the president gets assassinated, then they move up, and nobody wanted to do that. So I said to John, I'm sorry to have to ask you this, but if you will agree to be vice president, we will never ask you to be board president. You're too new. So he said yes, he was willing to be the vice president. I mean, he was wonderfully positive about everything, just about. So not long after he became the vice president, something happened with the president. She got mad at the former president and she quit. So we didn't have a president of the board. So I've got John, and I'm thinking, I promised him I would never ask him to, he was too new. So I went to him and I said, John, I'm sorry to have to be asking you this, but I have to ask you if you're willing to be board president. And we went around about that, and he said, I'll think about it. And then shortly after, he came back and said, yes, I'll serve as the board president. Wow, what a relief to us to have somebody willing to take that on. So anyway, come forward, quite a few years, he had to leave that job because of a stroke and his medical problems. But while he served, he had a wonderful spirit about him, and we were really appreciative of that. So it comes time for me to see him it was called Your Life in Steward, and then in Spiritus. And as I'm realizing that John's memory is not what we all knew it to be, I'm wanting to bring up positive memories with him. And so I wanted to say to him more than once, John, we appreciate you so much at your church because you stepped up. And as soon as I said, you stepped up, he added, but you didn't think I would do it, did you? So I tried to say, John, it wasn't that I didn't think you would do it. I didn't think we should ask you. But anyway, every time I brought up his wonderful service to us here, he would add, and you didn't think I would do it. Oh, John, that was the one memory I hoped you wouldn't keep. But he kept it. Anyhow, John really was a wonderful presence among us, John and Rose. They were always John and Rose, just like their email address. They came to the class together. They helped inspire the idea to go to the Mexican restaurant after a Christmas Eve service. Now, how many church gatherings do that? Go to the Mexican restaurant after we started doing that, and it actually increased the number of people that came to the Christmas Eve service. But there were a number of things that John talked about and got us to do, including a little communion-type service in our back room. John and Rose together were a wonderful presence among us, and Rose still is, and we're expecting you still to be. But I can say we'll remember John, but I can also say we'll keep John, because people that have touched our lives so positively, we do keep them. Remember, I like to say, people often call body parts members, and they often have to be reattached or helped in some way to stay part of the body. Well, John, as a member among us, will stay part of this body. We will remember him. We'll keep him because he certainly helped us keep going. John Crickenberger, he stood tall, but he didn't look down on us. It was wonderful to have him a part of us. We're going to close with Amazing Grace, 205. If you're able, please stand and sing. Amazing grace, how Churches are like families. We keep going because of the people who have loved us, because of the people who have smiled on us. And one of the mysteries of life and for churches, that love and that smiling doesn't go away. I'll always remember the smile on John Crickenberger's face, and you will too. Come on out to the back, we'll remember together. Play whatever you want. Bob Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto.